Okay, the name of this video is Moon Shadow Eclipse. I won't go into what it is I'm going to point out in it until at the very end. You'll see it then. Basically, it's an indictment of the globe more than anything else, but it will also prove the flat plane in the process. Okay, let's get stuck into some. I have to start basic, right? Start basic and move on to slightly more complicated. Okay, here we have a light source each side or each end. We have a balloon. The balloon is closer to the light source in the top part of the diagram, creating a bigger shadow on the surface there. It's closer to the surface and further from the light source in this bottom diagram, and so it's making a smaller shadow on the surface. Now, of course, the light source has divergent light, right? This is important. In the heliocentric paradigm, light is also divergent, right? The thing about the whole parallel light rays coming from a heliocentric sun hitting a heliocentric globe, right, Earth, it's that they're almost exactly parallel. They're not exactly parallel. They're almost exactly parallel, which means that there is a claim of very, very tiny divergence, right? This is what they have to claim, right? Because they can't claim light is not diverging. Because it is. I mean, they're not claiming the light from their sun is not divergent. It's just a proximity issue, right, and a size issue, right. So light is always divergent, whether it be in reality or within the heliocentric paradigm. Here, right, if the object is moved closer to the screen, the shadow gets smaller. Right, we know this. This is basic, right. Move the object closer to the light source, the shadow gets bigger. Closer to the surface, and the shadow gets smaller. Right, basic stuff. Angle of elevation, you can determine the height of, based off the angle of the sun to the sun, you determine the height of the obelisk or tower here based off of the length of the shadow, right? Which comes back to, it's elevation angles. Obviously, they use this type of thing with trigonometry in surveying and different things. They also use it in navigation. But obviously, the most famous use of this is with Eratosthenes, which we're going to get to in a minute. Just briefly, though. Okay, here we have again pole, a sun at 45-degree angle. That means that if the sun is at 45-degree angle, then the length of the shadow is probably going to be equal to the pole, blah, 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 right? And, just basic elevation angle, right? That they're going to use to determine the height of the pole or whatever. But in this scenario here, they actually would be using the GP of the sun, right? Which we're going to get to in a minute again. Right, here we are again to the sun, pole, angle of elevation, length of shadow, right? So this all requires, in reality, you see, what you will notice about all this is you have, for the observer, all the angles are angles. They're not parallel light rays, right? Now, light rays don't actually exist, but for the process of explaining, right, we'll use them here, right? But the whole point is that the shadows do exist and the shadow lengths exist. So it's determined that a sun ray, right, if you want to call it sun ray creates this shadow length with the pole, blah, blah, blah. But there's two things that are important to remember here. All this is an angle to the sun, right? And they determine the distance to the sun's GP and different things, or the height of an object using a flat plane, right? Now, in the heliocentric paradigm, they're not claiming that the sun is coming in at angles. Sun rays is that all the sun rays are coming in straight, almost exactly parallel, almost. That's their claim. But we're on a convex surface, and that is how they explain, right? That's the only way they can explain these straight line horizontal shadows on a globe Earth, right? The only way to explain them is to get away from the very angle that you'll take to them, right, and the flat plane you're going to use, and go into a mathematical claim where those shadows can be created, but only the angles. This angle can be created on a convex surface of radius 3959 miles. Right, with this pole, if the sun rays are coming in almost exactly parallel, sun rays of light, they're not real, but for mathematical description we use them, right? But they can only reference this angle part here for an observer, but not, or this line here for an observer, but not the surface. The surface shadow, right, within their paradigm is not straight, it's not horizontal. The distance from here to the GP of the sun is not horizontal in their paradigm. So they don't actually have any angles. That's the point, excuse me. I'm overcoming a chest infection. They don't have any angles. What they have is a mathematical claim that allows, when I say angles, they don't have any flat plane to determine the angle on. They only have the angle, right, mathematically hitting a globe, right? Basically, they can show with almost exactly parallel light rays and, let's say, a pole, mathematically how this angle would be. You would get this angle to the surface, or that length of a shadow, let's just say, of this pole almost exactly as we see in reality, but it will be a curved shadow. It's nonsense because it doesn't work in reality. It only works as a claim within heliocentrism, mathematically, right? Once again, here we go again, right? See, the sun, divergent. They can't deny that there's divergent light. They just have to try and say that we're getting a lot of light rays almost parallel and that we're on a convex surface, yet they need a completely horizontal surface to explain any of this. For anything we do in reality, the surface has to be horizontal. We can't, like celestial navigation, astronomy, surveying, airplanes, aerospace, everything. There has to be, the surface has to be horizontal for us to do any of this. For elevation or depression angles, zenith angles, they have to use a horizontal surface. So at all times, horizontal surface is needed, right? But as I said, they must claim that there is almost exactly parallel light rays hitting a convex surface. This is what they have to claim, right, because of what they're claiming. But I'm going to show how this causes them a major problem. Not only does it cause a major problem because in reality we need a flat surface, a horizontal to do any of these things, right? And we measure along a horizontal, right? Not only is that the fact, but there's another thing that's going to cause them a problem at the end of the video. Nothing is as it seems. Okay, here we are at the start of basically what would be the Eratosthenes claim, right? Here we have a pole and a sun ray hitting it and creating a shadow angle from here out to here, and from here to here is the G. This is the distance between the pole and the GP of the the sun, and from here to here is the distance between the observer and the GP of the sun. So for this to be calculated, measured, anything, you require a right angle triangle again, or they keep requiring right angle triangles. The very thing that the ballers say aren't part of celestial navigation and aren't part of, they're not, elevation angles aren't right angle triangles, even though in the Eratosthenes claim he's using a well line straight down from the sun, and then a horizontal line from that well, which is the GP of the sun, all the way to the observer, and then the angle of the angle, right, based off the length of the shadow, back up to the sun. That's a right angle triangle, also known as an elevation angle, for all the super bozos out there on the ball side. Here we are again, Alexandria, Cyan. This is the well. This is the obelisk, in Alexandria. So the well in Cyan and the obelisk in Alexandria. Right angle triangle. There is no other way to determine this length and distance other than using a right angle triangle. Right? That's what Eratosthenes did. If he existed, that's what he did. He measured, right, 500 miles of our current units of measure, land measure, right, using a right angle triangle, which means he measured horizontally. Because the only way you can actually determine this is through using your baseline being an adjacent, which means it has to be a horizontal. You can only do this using a right angle triangle. And that's what he did. He got a 7.24 angle, zenith angle, right? That's what he got, right? After measuring 80 whatever degree elevation angle, right? And that gave him a distance, meaning himself and the GP, which was the well in cyan of the sun. That's how he worked it out, right? That's how they say he worked it out, right? Whatever, right? That's the basics, right? But there's more to the claim than that, because Eratosthenes, right? This is the official claim. I know you have to excuse the diagrams. It's not the clearest diagram. I couldn't find the ones I was looking for online. If the Earth is flat, then the sun will be close and local, and the divergent light from the sun, right, would mean that objects of the same height would have shadows of different length, right? That is what happens. In reality, that's what we see. Now, see, he needed to explain that on a convex surface of 3959 mile radius, right? Because he didn't measure anything other than a flat plane, and he knew it. So what did he need to do? He needed to get away from the angles, which the thing was the truth, reality. The thing was destroying his globe paradigm within that claim, the Eratosthenes claim, right? And he needed to go to how would the shadows happen on a globe. So he went to a mathematical situation away from reality, the very thing he used to measure his 500 mile, which is a right angle triangle horizontal baseline. And he went to, if the sun was really big and far away, right, and the Earth was a globe, right, then the angles to, the shadow lengths for objects of the same size, right, were placed in different places would be different, because the angle would be getting created by parallel light rays, but it would be the actual objects themselves that would be in different places, rather than the sunlight being divergent, the sun rays hitting it divergent, hitting the surface divergent, they're hitting it parallel. But as you can see, look along here, we have a curved adjacent, right? It's total nonsense, right? But we'll carry on, because we're going to get into the real weeds of nonsense now. So here we are. This is flatter.ws. I always use this guy's stuff because he's always totally wrong, proves himself to be wrong, but he does some good diagrams. So here's what he's saying was wrong, yet this is exactly what we see in reality. And here's what he's saying is right, which is not what we see in reality. But mathematically, that's right for a convex surface of radius 3959 miles, right? Mathematically, that's correct. But it doesn't work in reality, because that is a curved adjacent, right? That's reality. We all know that. This is not reality. We all see this and divergent angles like this with a horizontal plane. No one observes this, right? It can't be observed. But this also traps them now, causes them problems. So now we're going to move on to the real nonsense, right? You have extended source light and point source light, right? So point source light with an object, right, gives only an umbra, right, which is basically a divergence. Basically, what this means is that the object will cast a bigger shadow than itself. But they're saying in a broad source, right, light. So this is when they're getting into their sun being very, very big, right, their moon being smaller than the globe, right, but the sun being so big and bigger than both that when the parallel light rays hits the moon, right, then it creates a shadow on the surface of the globe. But they're trying to eventually start claiming that this umbra actually gets smaller. Now that's completely false, right? But just pay attention to the lines of the penumbra there for a second, right? Also, this is important. You'll see in a minute. Here we have it again, right? Where we have this umbra here and the penumbra around it, right? As you can see, pay attention to the lines of the penumbra, right? And they try and claim that, let's say, if this is the surface of their globe, although it's flat, it's not going to be, but just we'll say it is for the moment, just to do what we're trying to do here. This is their moon, let's say, and this is their sun, right? Then that means that they're going to end up with, basically what they should end up with is this, right, based off of their claims. But they're actually claiming that this shadow here is actually smaller, gets smaller. Now, that's total nonsense. You can't make the shadow get smaller. The shadow can't be smaller than the object, right? There is no way you can mess around and make things look like they're getting smaller, but the shadow will never be smaller than the object. But what's important here is the penumbra. See this? Because this is a darkened area around the main shadow, right? This is important. Now I'll show you the same diagram again, just with a different background, right? As you can see again, there's a penumbra, which is a darkened area around the main shadow, which is only the same size, they're showing it here in this diagram, only the same size as the object, right? There is no way to make that shadow smaller, right? I've seen a few people trying to demonstrate how they could make a smaller shadow than the object, but it was nonsense. They were trying to work outside of what, they didn't have parallel light rays for a start. That's number one, right? Because you can't create parallel light rays in reality. Even if, like, I know they're saying that they're not actually claiming them to be parallel, they're claiming they're almost exactly parallel, almost, right? But they're also claiming that the light coming from their sun is divergent. But because it's so big, their sun is so big that by the time that the light hits their globe, that it hasn't actually diverged very much. That's what they're basically claiming, right? So it's very, very, very small amount of divergence, which makes the light rays from their sun almost parallel. Light rays that doesn't exist. But here you have, but they try and claim that the Umbra is gotten, right, now it's showing exactly the same size as let's say if this is the moon here. But as I said, I've seen some demonstrations where people are trying to make a shadow smaller than the object. And what they had to do was totally outside of this scenario here. And they also didn't have parallel light rays, because you can't have parallel light rays. They've tried to even create parallel light rays using slits in and a wide light source. And even at that, the light rays still diverge immediately. So the whole thing about light rays from their massive sun hitting their globe and not only after slightly diverging, no, they would have massively diverged anyway. But it doesn't matter, because what's important is the penumbra. Pay attention to the penumbra. Here's what I'm talking about, right? You have the umbra here, right, as we see it in normality, right? The shadow bigger than the object, right? But there they have the sun, right? They're saying sun and moon, but really it's the sun, right? And their moon, and it's hitting the globe surface. But they're claiming that the shadow of the moon is actually getting smaller. But they're also, this is mathematical nonsense, where they have these crossing lines also showing a penumbra, right? So penumbra and penumbra. Now, that doesn't happen. We don't see this, right? We don't see this umbra and penumbra. We just see shadows. That's it. We don't see a special dark shadow and another shadow near it. They're not separate. They're the one shadow. These are not separate things. They're the one shadow. But there's a one major flow here, right? And it's not even this part. Let me just show you. Here I have between, right, a second now, between this point here, which is B, and this point here, which is C, right, I have 120 miles, right, of arc length, right, along the surface of a globe out of radius 3959 miles. Here is their moon. It doesn't matter if it's close or far away, that's not going to change anything. Because that's not going to change anything, because I have parallel light rays from the sun, right? They're saying they're almost exactly parallel, right? Mathematically, they make them parallel. Mathematically, they're doing their best to make them as parallel as possible, right? So these are almost super exactly parallel, right? What do you notice here? Between point B and point C, right, 120 miles, right, of arc here is blocked out by their moon. Everything to the side is not, because it can't be, because they're claiming parallel light rays from their sun. So they can't have, sorry, just trying to fix something here. They can't have the claim of parallel, almost exactly parallel light rays, and be claiming a penumbra, right? The whole point of all, they also can't have this umbra. See these lines here coming in, getting close to the edge, from the edge of the sun to the edge of the moon, let's just say here. They can't have that, They don't have that. They have claimed parallel, almost exactly parallel light rays from the sun hitting their moon and hitting the surface of their globe Earth, which means they can't have these divergent penumbras and they can't have these umbras because there is nothing going in within their claim and there's nothing going out. It's going straight down. So that means, right, to the surface, that means this right here between point B and point C, right, between those 2 points, that's the only part that can be blocked by their moon during a solar eclipse. Now, within the last solar eclipse that happened in this year, 2024, that I'm making this video, within the shadow was, I think, 115 or 120 miles. I have 120 here, right? So if the shadow is 120 miles, let's just say, right, wide, then that means that the diameter of their moon within their claim must also be 120 miles. Do you know what I mean? It can't not be. It can't be the moon. This can't be bigger than that 120, if you understand what I mean. Now, it can be smaller in reality with divergent light hitting it if it was even the thing that's in front of the sun. I'm not claiming it is because I think the first person ever that I'm aware of to point out that I couldn't prove that it was. But I don't have solid proof that it's not. But it doesn't matter because we just work within the heliocentric claim. Because within the heliocentrism, they are claiming that it is the new moon that's in front of the sun, and they are claiming almost exactly parallel light rays. So if that is the case, then there is no way you can have a penumbra and absolutely no way you can have an umbra, as they try to make it. You can't have that because, just give me a line here a second, right? You're going to have this kind of nonsense, right? And that kind of nonsense, right? Now, how are you going to have that with almost parallel light rays? You can't. You can only have what I'm showing without these black lines. That's what you can have. You can't have anything else. Within that claim, that's all you can have. So if the shadow on the of the eclipse, right, if the shadow on the Earth was 115 or 120 miles in diameter, right, that means that basically their moon, that means their moon can't only be that. It can't be. Now, as I said, in reality, whatever is in front of the sun, right, whether it be the moon or whatever else, right, whatever it is, in reality, right, the shadow can be way bigger than that because, it's divergent light, small local sun with divergent light hitting a flat surface. But within their claim, they're claiming almost exactly parallel, right, sun rays, right, hitting a convex surface. And they have to say that because that's the only way they can mathematically explain the angles of the shadows that we see in reality. And they're shadows that when they use them, right, they must use a horizontal plane, right? When they use them, right, in reality, they have to treat the Earth as flat. There's no other way to do it because the Earth is flat. Right? If you want to address reality, you have to address reality. It's that simple. So what they're doing with this nonsense is for never mind the umbra. They can't have the umbra because they're claiming parallel light rays. But they certainly can't have a penumbra, which is a divergence. How do you have a divergence? You can't, right? You can only have what I'm showing up here, and that's it, with the exception of these stupid black lines. So I'm going to go back there, I'll get rid of them, right? You can only have that. That's it. That means that their moon, right, can be no more than 115, 120 miles in diameter. How does that work for their paradigm? Because within their claim, that's all it can be. It literally geometrically can't be anything else. Based off of the claims they make concerning their paradigm, it can't be any bigger than the shadow it makes. Now, the problem with that is in the solar eclipse of 2017, I think the shadow was 70 miles wide, right? So now that's down to the distance of the moon from the surface of the Earth, let's just say, right? But that can't happen either. You can't have the moon, no matter what size or what distance the moon is from the globe Earth, you can't have a situation where at one solar eclipse, right, it's 70 miles wide, and another solar eclipse, it's 115 or 20 miles wide. That can't happen. It has to be the exact same width during each eclipse. It can't be different, because it doesn't matter if you move this moon here, right, 10 times its own diameter up to it. That's not going to change what's happening here based off of almost exactly parallel light rays that they have to claim, because they can't not claim them because they need to explain the shadows while ignoring the flat surface that they need to measure the shadows, right? They're absolutely poleaxed here. There's no way around it. There's no way for a shadow in one solar eclipse to be only 70 miles wide, and a shadow in a solar eclipse some years later to be 120 miles wide. That's just not possible within their paradigm. It can only be, the shadow can only be the exact diameter of their moon each and every time. It can never change, and it can never have an umbra or a penumbra, because an umbra is lines going in the way. That is not what they're claiming. And a penumbra requires divergent light, right? The localized divergent light, not distant divergent light from a big source. So the whole lot, excuse me, my cat is here, one of my cats. So the whole lot is a fraud. There is no way out of it. This is complete nonsense. Basically, within their paradigm, their moon is 70 miles wide or 120 miles wide or whatever it is. It basically, that contradiction, that issue, there's just no way out for them. This is it, no way out. They can't go past that. As I said, the diameter of their moon can't change. What size of a shadow we cast on their surface won't change. It can't, no matter how far away it is. Once that sun is directly behind it within their paradigm, the amount of shadow or amount of blockage on the surface of their globe has to be always equal every time, all the time, and it can't have a smaller shadow than the size of their diameter, and it can't have a bigger penumbra, right? Because that requires divergent light, locally divergent light. Okay, that's the end of that. I think my point is made. Thanks for watching.